Shalom, welcome everybody to this Shiur in Tanya today. I'm Eliyahu Shear from Chesed Ve'emet. You can find me at www.lovingkindness.co. And today we're learning Tanya by the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shear Zalman of Liadi. We're making use of the beautiful lessons in Tanya books, which are available free online on CHaBaD.org. And you'll be able to see the text as I'm reading it and follow along. How I work is to read the Hebrew and translate it. You can see the translation underneath as well. And if there's anything that I've translated that's not 100% exactly according to what it says, feel free to read the translation. And we work through most of the notes in this book together as well. If there's a note that we skip, you're welcome to go through it again. Either you can see it online for yourself or you can review the video and watch it at that point in time. So we're beginning on chapter 4. And even though last week we already covered some of chapter 4, I'm just going to briefly go through it again so that we know exactly where we are. And at the point in time that we reach that same point, I will then elaborate again. So here's where we begin. The Baal HaTanya is telling us about the nature of the godly soul, the nature of the animal soul. And he's explained to us that there are 10 soul powers. V'od, and now he continues with this idea, and he's going to expand on the idea of the 10 soul powers, but he's going to take it to a new level with regards to the nature of the soul. V'od, yesh lechol nefesh elokis shlosha levushim. We go one step forward. There is to this godly soul 3 garments. Shehem makshava, dibur, u'maaseh shel taryag mitzvot Torah. And the 3 garments are thought, speech, and action of the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah, which means to say that the godly soul has no way to express itself in the world except through these particular garments. A garment tells oneself and it tells the person who one is relating to about oneself. For example, if I'm going to be a police officer, I will wear the garments of a police officer. If I'm going to be a doctor, then I will wear white garments to show people that I'm a doctor, and I'll wear a stethoscope around my shoulders, and the people can see exactly that here I am, I'm the doctor. And whatever it is that I'm going to be wearing, it's going to be a sign to everybody else as to who I am. Therefore, if I'm going to express myself in a certain way to people, and I want them to know more about me, I use these 3 garments in order to tell people or myself who I am. What are the 3 garments? The thought, speech, and action of the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. And here's what happens. When a person fulfills, practically speaking, all the practical mitzvahs of the Torah, so therefore he now shows himself to be involved. His godly soul is now involved in the activity. This is how he expresses his godly soul. He puts on the Tefillin. He eats the kosher food. He holds the Lulav and etrog in his hands. He sits in the Sukkot. And how does he express himself through the garment of speech? He occupies himself in the explanation of all the 613 mitzvahs and their halachas. This is garment number 2. How do I share more about my godly soul to other people, not just through the actions that I perform, but through the speech that I'm involved in? What type of speech? Through the study of the Torah. And of course, when one studies Torah, we should study the Torah aloud, just like we're doing right now. And of course, if a person is in a shiur, he is also partaking of that mitzvah as if he were reciting those words himself, because he has no choice. He's sitting and listening to the shiur. But of course, he's welcome to follow along and to read the words himself. The main thing is to actually express the words from one's mouth. When we study Torah, it is not really sufficient to just simply read the words with one's mind, but rather one needs to express what one is learning through one's words. So we say over here that the person's speech is immersed in the study of Torah, which includes the exposition of the commandments. For example, Tractate Berachos deals with the commandments and the laws of blessings. Tractate CHaBaD deals with the commandments and the laws of Shabbos observance, and so on. Over Makshava. Now, this is where we got to in the previous shiur, that we have over here thought as well. That a person is able to conceive, he can attain all that is possible for him to attain through the paradise of the Torah. And we said last week that the paradise, which also means paradise, or it also means the orchard, and it also refers to the highest levels of Torah, known as the paradise, as we've discussed before. But in particular, paradise refers to the 4 levels of Torah which we study, which refers to the pshat, the remez, the drush, and the sod, which is the simple meaning of the Torah, the hint meaning of the Torah, what the hint is, for example, gematrias, numerical values involved in words, the drush, the homiletical expositions of the Torah, stories, agadah, more insights into the depth of the simple meaning of the Torah. We take things a little bit deeper. And finally, the sod, the secret of the Torah. We need to have all 4 levels in order to complete our souls. As we've studied before, and we're going to study in more detail, that there are 4 worlds. There are 4 spiritual worlds, the worlds of Atzilut, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. And as we progress in our study of Torah, we bring ourselves to a particular level of Torah. For example, when we are studying the simple meaning of Torah, we're in the world of Asiya. When we study the Torah on the level in the world of Yetzira, and we go up a level, we're now studying on the level of Remez. When we go to the next world of Bria, we're studying Torah in the level of Drush, of exposition, of homiletical exposition. And finally, when we're involved in the highest world known as Atzilut, this beautiful, extremely godly world where there is just a state of total goodness, this is the world of Sod, of the secrets of Kabbalah. And here he explains what these different levels are, as we discussed before. Hare, behold, klalos taryag evarei nafsho melubashim betaryag mitzvot haTorah. We have that the 613 rules, which are really the limbs of the soul, enclose themselves in the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah, which means to say that we ourselves have within ourselves 613 commandments. And when we begin to involve ourselves in the mitzvot, one of those 613 mitzvot, we begin to interact with the mitzvah according to the level of our soul as it is attached within our body to that particular mitzvah. Yari explains in a note, just as the human body consists of 248 organs and 365 blood vessels, corresponding to the Torah's 248 positive commandments and the 365 prohibitive commandments, which gives us 613 in all, the soul similarly comprises 613 organs, the spiritual counterpart of the 613 bodily organs. Each organ corresponds to a specific commandment. When through its 3 garments, thought, speech, and action, the soul embraces all 613 commandments, then all 613 organs of the soul are enclosed in all 613 commandments, each organ of the soul in its related commandments. Note the Alter Rebbe's emphasis of the word all the precepts which require physical action in expounding all the 613 commandments, all that he is capable of understanding. Should his garments fail to include all 613 commandments, were he to omit one specific commandment, then the corresponding organ of the soul will remain bereft of its mitzvah garment. This is very interesting because it's a very beautiful book that is written, known as the Sefer Haredim, in which the author, a great Talmid Chacham, a great giant in the Torah world, tells us in a very brief manner how certain commandments relate to certain parts of the body. And he explains over there that it's quite probable that when a person is experiencing a particular problem with a part of the body, he's in pain, or that part of the body is not working correctly, etc., what one needs to do is one needs to investigate to what degree it relates to a particular mitzvah of the Torah. Because very often what happens is the mitzvah that correlates with that part of the body is not being observed properly, and as a result, the blood is not moving into that particular part of the body correctly, and as a result, that part of the body is experiencing pain or going through difficulties or whatever the case may be. In other words, the duty that we have upon ourselves in the world is to complete the soul and perfect it as it resides inside the physical body. We do that through the 365 through observing or refraining from the 365 negative commandments and performing the 248 positive commandments. The 248 positive commandments correspond to the limbs of the body, the 365 negative commandments corresponding to the arteries and the veins and so on, the inside parts of the body. And when we therefore fulfill the mitzvot, we are connecting those parts of the body to the mitzvah, and we are perfecting the soul as it resides in the body in that particular aspect. Thus, we see in a general sense how fulfillment of all the commandments with one's thought, speech, and action clothes the entire soul in all 613 commandments of the Torah. The Alter Rebbe now goes on to specify which components of the soul are clothed by which particular garment. Ubi pratos. And here he discusses now, in particular, Bechinas CHaBaD shebenafsho. When we speak about the aspect of the CHaBaD in his soul, which means the Chokhmah, the Bina, and the Da'at, which refers to the wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, which refers to one's brains. So the brains of a person, Mulubashot ba'asagas HaTorah, the brains are enclosed within conceiving the Torah itself, Shehu Masik B'Pardes, which he conceives through understanding the four levels of the Torah. This is the CHaBaD. We discussed in an earlier shiur when we were discussing the 10 soul powers that the CHaBaD is the brain of the soul. And one has to immerse the CHaBaD within the learning of the Torah. Through learning the Pardes levels of the Torah, one begins to perfect the CHaBaD part of one's soul. Yes?
I just want to ask, would you refrain from using the word mind rather than brain?
I should say the mind, or I should say the brain. Which do you prefer?
Well, brain to me is a specific physical organ,
yes.
Whereas the word mind raises interesting what other people would think. It just came to my mind when you said brain. I think of this physical thing in my skull. Maybe because a friend of mine had brain surgery yesterday. Whereas mind is something much more, you can't hold on to a mind. It has both a physical element connected to us, I guess, but also something greater than that.
Okay.
I don't know.
So what you're saying is, you're saying that it's preferable to use the word, as I understand it, it's preferable to use the word mind as opposed to brain, because brain refers to the physical brain itself. Is that what you're saying?
That's what my reaction is, just off the...
Okay. Yeah. What is interesting to note here is that as we learn in the different books of Kabbalah, for example, we know that the soul clothes itself in 3 particular organs of the body, which is quite fascinating, which means to say the following. We have 3 lower levels of the soul. We have the nefesh, we have the ruach, and we have the neshama. Now, according to the teachings that we'll learn about, we see that the nefesh manifests itself inside the liver, and the ruach manifests itself inside the heart, and the neshama manifests itself inside the brain, which is fascinating. What does that mean exactly? It means that the component of soul level that is causing the liver to function is actually the nefesh. So on the one hand, even if I refer to the nefesh as the liver, it's not entirely also incorrect, because the liver is the component and organ of the body which houses the nefesh. And the ruach rests inside the heart. And the heart is actually the component which relates directly to the ruach. So when we say the brains, for example, the CHaBaD being the brains, it actually, I hear exactly what you're saying, and I'm going to try and correct it now and say it rather as the mind, as you said. But I just wanted to say that when we say the brains are the actual physical components of where the soul is resting. So to a certain degree, it is the mindset, it is the mind, it is the brain of the soul, which is sitting inside the physical component known as the brains.
But if I may add to that, is that, let's say, for instance, a person unfortunately has some kind of an illness and they remove their liver. Do they no longer have a ruach? I don't think that would be the case.
Right. So as you said, the liver, which relates to the nefesh, the liver relates to the nefesh. Right. And actually, I must admit that your question is quite an exciting question. And I'll tell you that I personally have that question myself. I have it on a number of levels. I have the question which relates to the blood of a person, and the question that relates to the liver, the heart, and the brains, as you are correctly pointing out. If a person had a problem with the liver and he had a liver transplant, what would that mean, practically speaking, in terms of where the nefesh is? What has happened to the nefesh? Did the nefesh die, for example? His nefesh died and a new nefesh entered into him. Could that be such a thing? What about blood? If I say that the soul is resting inside the blood, and for whatever reason I need a blood transfusion, now does that mean to say that if I get blood from another person, I get some sort of his energy entering into my body? I must tell you that I have the same question myself, and I think it's out there. I think the question is an open one. I don't think it's entirely incorrect. As we know, for example, again, when we study the Sha'ar HaGilgulim, in the gates of reincarnations, we're going to see that there is a level at a certain point in time that what can happen to a person is that he perfects himself to such a degree that his nefesh has been perfected and he is now deserving of receiving the ruach. But there are various problems involved, and the ruach cannot come down into the person's body because the ruach is incomplete and the nefesh is complete. And because of the various things that happen, the incomplete ruach cannot rest upon a complete nefesh. So what often happens is the nefesh actually leaves the person and another nefesh enters into him, and then the ruach rests on top of the other nefesh that is there. But as far as the person is concerned, I've never met a person who physically was able to pinpoint such a moment where he could say, oh, I think that my nefesh has just left me. I feel that my ruach has just entered me, and so on and so forth. What exactly is going on? I wonder if there is a certain spiritual change that is occurring. That's one question that I have. But one thing I can for sure say is that it is the power of the soul level of nefesh that is activating the liver. And it is the power of the soul level of the ruach that is activating the heart. The heart is pumping all the time. What is causing the heart to pump, or what is causing the brain to function? There's something behind it that is causing it to function. These are the levels of the soul. What exactly happens if a person had a liver transplant or he had a heart transplant? Does that mean that his spiritual aspect, his spiritual source somehow changed? He's interacting with another person. He's connecting with another person. Perhaps he even is connected with the other person on a soul level, and something is going on over here. I'm not quite sure.
Some people believe that. Yeah, but some people that's what I say really affects some people when they get a blood transfusion.
Yes.
Are they getting the soul or part of the soul of the other person?
Yes.
A friend of ours had a stem cell transplant, and the most amazing thing was, which I didn't think was possible, the way the doctors knew that it was successful is her blood type changed.
Okay.
I never thought that was possible.
In other words, something changed on a spiritual level to cause something to change on a physical level.
Yeah. Powerful.
What exactly changed? It's impossible to really know. I think one really has to be really in touch with the spiritual system, the spiritual worlds, and the spiritual nature of things to really know what is happening. But again, we're not discussing transplants and transfusions and so on and so forth. But it is a basic principle that the CHaBaD of one's soul does enclose itself. In other words, his mind. The CHaBaD, Chokhmah, Bin, and Das, these three soul powers are going to enclose themselves within the paradise of the Torah. He does use those soul powers. And the only way that I could express it without falling into the same trap that you're putting me into and saying, don't use the word brain, is that ultimately the power is using the brain source in order to be able to achieve its goal of studying Torah. If a person has a problem with his brain, God forbid, then even though his soul power of Chokhmah can be there, if there is something wrong with the physical brain, the Chokhmah will not be able to release itself inside the brain, allowing the person to think straight. No matter how great his power of Chokhmah, if there's something missing in the brain itself, physically, the brain has not been set up correctly from birth or due to an accident or due to an operation, the Chokhmah won't be able to manifest itself. And from that aspect, I still believe that that is the concept of the CHaBaD manifesting into a physical aspect. But I'll use the word mind, and it's quite correct as well. Now, the main thing is that a person must immerse his mind with to the fullest degree that he's able to do, for shorish nafsho lemala, and according to the source of his soul above. Here we're talking about the degree to which a person has been blessed to understand what the Torah is. So, for example, of course, a child who is brought up at the age of 3 and already he's learning the Aleph base and he's reading Hebrew nicely, and by the time he's 5 he's learning Chumash, and by the time he's 10 or by the time he's 7 he's learning Mishnah, or by the time he's 15 according to the Mishnah, or by the time he's 10, whatever you want to say, he's learning Gemara, and his mind is absorbing all these things. Then of course by the time this young fellow reaches the age of 20, he will actually be highly advanced in his understanding of many areas of Torah. And at that point in time, he could already begin starting to immerse himself in the study of the Kabbalah. But then let's take the situation of another person whose whole life until the age of 60, 70, 80 years old, he never knew anything of the Torah. He doesn't even know how to read the Aleph base. And you present him with the Aleph base and say, now let's get started. We now need to study all of Torah. We've got to get through Shas, we've got to get through Poskim, we've got to get to the Midrashim, we've got to get to the Chumash and the Tanakh and the commentaries, everything we've got to do. So this person's life is totally overwhelmed. He will not be able to cope with all of these things from the age of 80, trying to grasp all of the, it's just impossible. He's not going to get there. Torah starts at a young age, number 1, and number 2, according to a person's ability. Very recently, perhaps maybe 2 years ago, not so long ago, a young boy at the age, or young man, I should say, at the age of 16, he had already completed going through the Talmud 4 times. And he'd been tested. This particular fellow, I think there were 2 of them, or it was the same fellow, I forget exactly what happened, was tested by the boy and a Rebbe to see whether or not he knew the material, and he knew it off by heart. He knew all aspects of Shas off by heart, and he was 16 years old. He'd gone through it 4 times, he knew it off by heart, and there he was being tested, and he was successful. Now, the average person, I can include myself in that. When I was 16 years old, to speak to me about learning the whole of Shas is ridiculous, because at that stage, I didn't know anything. So I was about tshuva myself, so I was only starting to learn these concepts over here that we're speaking about now. Each person has to try the best that he can, according to the talents that he's been given, according to the station of his soul, according to what he feels he can grasp. He puts himself in, he absorbs whatever it is that he's able to the extent of his mental capacity and according to the supernal root of his soul. The one who comes from a higher level, from above, will also be able to absorb things much faster. He'll be able to understand things much clearer, and he'll be able to advance to much greater levels at a much faster speed. And this is incomparable when we speak about the nature of a tzaddik, like I've just mentioned now, somebody who already from the age of 10 and 15, these people are immersed in the study of Torah. We cannot compare such people to people who come to Torah much later, and then they try to absorb all of the Torah, and their soul root is not high enough to grasp all of these concepts. Each person to his level, what he can do, what he enjoys, and he immerses himself in all these aspects. One's mental capacity determines how much he may understand. The root of his soul determines the area in Torah for which he will have the greatest aptitude. Now, this is interesting. For example, one whose soul is related to the level of Pshat is more likely to comprehend the straightforward meaning of the words of Torah. A soul related to Remez will delve to the stratum of implied meaning underlying the words, and so on. When the person comprehends Torah to the extent of his mental capacity, then the CHaBaD components of his soul are clothed in the garment of thought of Torah, i.e. thought, as it is related to Torah. So he's teaching us a very deep concept here. Some people will open up a Chumash, and they will delight in learning the Chumash, and they will delight in learning Rashi, and they'll want to spend hours upon hours learning the Chumash and Rashi, and perhaps 1 or 2 other commentaries that are speaking about what Rashi is saying, and other commentaries, and they go through Tanakh, and they know the Tanakh inside and out, and all the stories, and all the main points of what was happening in the stories, and they love it. And you give them a Gemara to study, and they kind of take a few steps back. They can't quite follow what the Gemara is saying. They read a page here, a page there, and it's very nice. Because such a soul is rooted within the Peshat, meaning the simple meaning, perhaps just the Chumash, perhaps just the Tanakh. Whereas another person takes things further, and he says, I really enjoy learning gematrias. I like to know a little bit more deep into the Torah. Look at this word, how it relates to that word, and so on and so forth. He goes into the remes. Another person desires another area of Torah. For example, the drush. The drush is the homiletical exposition. He enjoys the stories, meaning the agadah. And he can go on and on telling secrets and wisdom about the stories of the Torah. This happened to this rabbi. This happened to that rabbi. This is the story behind it. This is the inner meaning behind that. He loves that aspect. And then you get another person who says, for me, I want to study Kabbalah. I want to involve myself in the depths of the Torah. I want to take my soul and go to the very depths of finding out who I am and how I relate to the physical world and how do I relate from the spiritual world from which I come from. Each person according to the source of his soul. Some people come from the level of Asiyah. Some people come from the level of Yetzirah, on the level of Bria, the level of Atzilut. And according to wherever a person comes from, he will find his niche in the Torah of what it is that he loves the most. So each person has to occupy himself according to his mental capacity and according to the source. Where is he coming from and what is it that he feels closest to? Let us keep in mind, each of us has a finite amount of time in the world. And if one looks at the Torah is infinite. There's so many areas to pursue. There's Gemara, there's Tanakh, there's Midrash, there's Sod, the secrets. There's even in swords, you can learn the teachings of the Ari. You can learn the teachings of Avraham Abulafia. You can learn the teachings of this one and that one, and so on and so forth. So many areas. And each of us has this finite amount of time. We need to choose the things that we love learning the most. Perhaps a person enjoys learning halakha. He loves the Shulchan Aruch. He loves the Tur. He loves the discussion of the halakha itself. He likes all essays that are written that discuss the shilas and shuvas from all the great rabbis throughout the generations. He likes the question and the answer of what the halakha is all about. Each person should take a look at himself and he should say, what are the areas of Torah that I enjoy the most? And spend the time learning those areas, because with a finite amount of time, spend the time involved in learning that you enjoy learning the most. And that will bring the greatest happiness to every person. V'hamidot. Now, the second part of these 10 soul powers that we need to immerse through expressing ourselves with these 3 soul garments are the attributes that follow after the 3 levels of the mind. Shehein yira, v'ahava, v'anfehim, v'toldosehim. These are fear and love and their branches and everything that follows on afterwards. Melubashot b'kiyum hamitzvahs. They are enclosed in the fulfillment of the mitzvahs, b'maaseh u'b'dibur, through action and speech. Shehu Talmud Torah shekeneged kulam. And when we speak about speech, we speak about, in particular, the study of Talmud Torah, which is equal, at least equal on the same level as all of them, if not even greater, depending on how we translate that expression. So we see over here that the midot, for example, the chesed, gevura, tiferet, netzach, hod, yesod, malchus, all of these attributes are clothing themselves within the mitzvahs. We do that through the maisa, through our actions, and we also do it through dibur. Why is dibur considered part of this? Because dibur comes ultimately through the malchus, comes through the mouth. So machshava is in the mind, the chokhmah, bina, and the da'as. But when we come to express it, we need a physical mouth to say the words that we're studying. We need to immerse the mouth, which is the malchus, in the words of Torah. The Alter Rebbe's previous statements that in comprehending the Torah, the soul's faculty of intellect clothes itself in thought, requires no further elaboration. It goes without saying that the intellect can comprehend Torah only through the vehicle of thought. His latter statement, however, that the midot are clothed in the fulfillment of the commandments in deed or in word, requires further amplification. What connection do the midot of fear and love have with action and speech? The seat of the emotions is in the heart. How do they come to clothe themselves in actions which are done with one's hand, in donning tefillin, for example, or in speech, where one uses his mouth, such as in oral Torah study? In answer to this question, the Alter Rebbe explains that completeness in the performance of the commandments demands love and fear of God. One can bring to his fulfillment of the commandments the fullness generated by vitality and depth of feeling only when he is imbued with fear and love of the Almighty. in Alter Rebbe's words. So basically what is happening here now is the midot are in particular coming through fear and love. Why? Because once I have a fear of God, I can implement the fear in a certain way. If I fear somebody, or if I fear a particular thing, that causes me to react in a certain way. If I love somebody, or I love a particular thing, it also causes me to react in a certain way. My body goes into action through the fear and the love that I have of a particular thing. Ki ha'ahava hi shoresh kol remach mitzvahs aseh. Love is the root of all the 248 positive mitzvahs of the Torah. Umimena hen nimshachot. And from these 248, and from the love, everything comes about. Ubilada. And without this love, ein lahem kiyum amiti. They will not have any fulfillment. Which means, if I'm to fulfill the mitzvah of Tefillin, or I'm to fulfill the mitzvah of keeping Shabbat, or I'm to fulfill the mitzvah of family purity, or charity, whatever mitzvah we're talking about, the only way that I will get to fulfill the mitzvah is through having love of Hashem. If I have not learned how to love Hashem, I will not fulfill these mitzvot. Why do I need to put on Tefillin? Why do I need to keep Shabbos? Why do I need to eat kosher? And so on and so forth. But when a person is filled with love of Hashem, then he sees the mitzvah for what it is, and he begins to implement the mitzvah in action through his body. Because a person who fulfills all of these positive mitzvahs truthfully, who aohev es shem Hashem, this is the person who loves Hashem. He loves the name of Hashem. And he desires to cleave to Hashem in truth. A person who has love will come to fulfill the mitzvot. If he does not yet have love, he will not come to fulfill the mitzvot. To the degree that he has love, so he will fulfill the mitzvot even more. And it's impossible to cleave to Hashem truthfully, unless he fulfills all 248 mitzvahs of the Torah. So a person who wants to show now how much he loves Hashem, he can only do it through the fulfillment of the 248 positive mitzvahs of the Torah. Thus, one's love of God and desire to cleave to him dictate that he observe the commandments. Why is it possible to cleave to God only by fulfilling the commandments? Because the 248 commandments corresponds to the 248 limbs of the king, so to speak, which means each mitzvah that one performs is actually a limb, so to speak, within the physical world. When we convert it to the spiritual reality that it is, that is the spiritual limb of the king, meaning God, as is explained elsewhere. Just as each of the organs of a human being is a vessel for the particular soul power that clothes itself in it, e.g., the eye is a vessel for the power of sight, the ear for hearing, and so on, so is each commandment a vessel for the specific aspect of God's will, the supernal will, which clothed itself in that particular commandment. Each commandment expresses not only the supernal will that a specific act be carried out, but also the particulars of its observance. Thus it is understood that by performing the commandments, one achieves unity with God, whose will they express. And this is what we were discussing also in the idea of the Derech Hashem that we spoke about last week, and we'll continue a little later, of the idea that a person who wishes to bring bracha to himself, that he can make use of God's name or names in order to bring this blessing upon himself. But there is a catch to it, and that is in accordance with the level of closeness that a person has with God. Because God won't allow one to make misuse of his name. But when a person is close to God through the fulfillment of the mitzvahs, through the studying of the Torah, that he begins to create a close relationship, then at that point in time, as Pirkei Avot says, when we make God's will our will, then God does our will as if and allows the action to happen only because I have that closeness with God. So the degree that I fulfill the 248 positive mitzvahs is that same degree that I will establish the closeness to God And it's the same degree that I will liken myself to God. I will attach myself to God through these 248 mitzvot, the 248 limbs of the king. It follows then that love of God clothes or expresses itself in one's performance of the 248 positive commandments. It is their root and life force, which leads one to observe them with the totality of one's being. For when one loves God and desires to cleave to him, he will perform his commandments as he would perform a task for a dear friend, with delight and zest and with all of his being. So the first aspect was love. If we're trying to cleave to God, then it means we desire, we want to be close to God. How do we show the closeness? Not just through meditation, not good enough. We need to fulfill all 248 mitzvahs of the Torah. We need to show God that we delight in his will. God's will is for us to keep Shabbos, to keep kosher, to keep the laws of family purity. I always highlight these three because to me, this is it. This is the basic backbone of the entire Torah. And then everything else follows from these three powerful mitzvot. We come to charity, and we come to Pesach, and we come to Sukkot, and all the other mitzvot, and so on and so forth. But when we have these three, we have the backbone of the Torah. We have the backbone of the love that we want to express in all of our life towards God. So that's the love aspect. Now, when we have the fear aspect, the fear is the root for the 365 negative commandments. Because a person is afraid to rebel against the king of all kings, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So in other words, once a person fears God, he's not going to come to transgress against God. The only time that a person transgresses against God is at a point in time where he rebels against him, and he believes that he doesn't have to fulfill that particular thing because he's not bound by it. So we say in a general sense that a person, for example, who doesn't fulfill any mitzvot, God forbid, which is not really an applicable statement to make. All Jewish people fulfill mitzvot at some point in time in their lives, even if they don't think that they're fulfilling it. They do many, many mitzvot, as the Torah says that a Jew is filled with mitzvot, like a pomegranate is filled with seeds. So, but the point is, to the degree that a person doesn't fear God, to that degree he believes he is free from having to fulfill the mitzvot of God. At this level, the word fear is taken in its simple sense, trepidation before the severity of God's commands. To the degree that I will fear God, to that degree I will refrain from doing anything against his wishes. Or yira pnimis mizo, or there is another fear which is even more internal than this, shemisposhesh migdulaso, that a person is embarrassed in front of God's greatness. What does it mean to be embarrassed in front of God's greatness? It means to appreciate that there's a world out there. And when we look at the world and we see how big it is, we realize how great the Creator is. And so that itself should put me into a state of fear and awe of who this Creator is. I look to the stars, I see how great the world is. I'm just a nothing in the world. What am I? I look and I see how much greatness there is, how many people there are in the world who are so different from each other. This God must be so powerful to be able to create all these people who think so differently and who all serve him at some point in time in their lives, whether through the good that they do, whether through the bad that they do. At some point in time, there is always a service of God going on. And this person is afraid to rebel against the eyes of his honor and to do bad in God's eyes. He will not rebel against anything of God. Kol to'avas Hashem asher sanei heim haklipot v'sitra akra. And all of these abominations that Hashem hates, these are the klipa and the sitra akra, which means to say, whenever we go against God's will, what we are doing is we are falling into the trap of following in the direction of impurity. This is the klipot and the sitra akra. This is the side of evil. It's the side of negativity. And the moment that we commit this avera, we fall into the pit, literally the klipot, into the absolute pit of where all of this evil is. And that's what takes us off track and takes us away from fearing God and, of course, from loving God and being attached to him. we're going to stop the Tanya Shiur for now, for today, and we're going to continue onwards with Derech Hashem. So for all my YouTube viewers, I say thank you very much for joining the Shiur. I hope that you enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you did enjoy it, please like the video and subscribe to my channel, click on the bell, and be notified when new Shiurim come out. As always, please feel free to be in touch with me. I'm Eliyahu Shear, and you can find my site at www.lovingkindness.co. I would be delighted to be in touch with you more and to have you on board as a partner in all of our activities. I wish you everything of the best and see you soon. Shalom, shalom. Bye-bye.